What's your favorite way to get news? Anybody here still read newspapers? A lot of us do. There are sources of information that we know carry some authority, and then those not so much, like this headline. The good news is we don't have to worry about Satan anymore. We have evidence that he was alive and now is dead. Or the next headline. These are some of the more sane things I've actually seen on tabloids. Why is it we tend not to trust that kind of journalism? Those rags that are definitely tabloids, their highest commitment is not to honest seeking of the facts. It is to sell newspapers. So how do you know who to trust? Look at their track record. Okay, the Lebanon Daily News is not what it used to be. Let's all agree with that at the outset. But you would never see that kind of headline in the Lebanon Daily News. This whole issue of knowing who to trust, especially when the person or the organization you had trusted proves itself unworthy of your trust, became a major issue for our entire country, probably most prominently in the Vietnam era. Can you say Watergate? It was about that time that a move across our nation began to take everybody's attention, and the question was asked, who in established authority can we trust? And over the decade, the answer became no one. Why should we trust institutions that prove themselves unworthy of our trust? That distrust of institutions has become a significant hallmark of millennials. That distrust extends as far as the church as well. Institutions have proven themselves unworthy so often that millennials have a real difficult time with anything organized having to do with religion. The problem is there needs to be some kind of authority that you appeal to, even if it's only yourself. We are creatures designed to look for someone to be an authority in our lives. And since the fall, the default person of authority in our lives has become ourselves. I become my own authority. And in the 21st century, some of those absolutes have become things like whatever's comfortable, what makes me happy. I cringed a number of years ago in talking to a mother that was a godly woman. Her kids had bumped into some very serious marital difficulties and were trying some things that just weren't working and really going some wrong directions. And this woman said, as long as they're happy, I guess that's what counts. That's become the mantra of our day. Who in authority can you trust? Paul, the apostle, had this very problem with some young believers in the province of Galatia. Take a step back. As long as in the beginning the gospel was being shared with Jews, you do know that that's how the church began, entirely among the Jewish people. As long as the gospel was going to the Jews, everything was fine. They had some hiccups, that Ananias and Sapphira thing, and the whole widows being overlooked in distribution of the food thing. But they got through those and things were going smoothly until somebody had the bright idea to go tell Gentiles about Jesus. And now we've got a whole new ball game. And it comes down to this important question. Do we still have to obey the law and be circumcised in order to follow Jesus? Paul had planted these churches in the province of Galatia. And there were some Jewish Christians from Jerusalem. They really were born again. But they were convinced that the law of Moses, which was so core to their being, was central to followers of Jesus. And so they made their way to these churches that Paul had planted in Galatia and were explaining to people, now you got to understand, Paul meant well, but keep in mind, he wasn't one of the 12. He didn't really see Jesus. He didn't walk with Jesus. He didn't get his information directly from Jesus. The 12 did. And we're here to tell you, you need to be circumcised and obey the law of Moses to be a follower of Jesus. Now, we today have 2,000 years of church history to know that's not the case, but this was the very beginning of the church. And Paul, getting word about what these believers were beginning to believe, in his absolute fury over those Jewish Christians and his real concern for these young Galatian Christians, fired off a letter. And he knew the most effective way to stop this drift into legalism was to tell them his story. And we find out things in the letter to Galatians about Paul that we didn't know before. He told them his story, what we might call his testimony. Remember the parable of the two lost sons? One left home and was lost. One stayed home and was just as lost. Paul was like the elder brother. All these years I've been slaving for you, and I never disobeyed your orders. I was the good son. He was convinced that he was right, and he had this single-minded passion for all things Jewish, and focused that passion on eliminating what he was convinced was this dangerous cult. Followers of Jesus, followers of the way. And then he met Jesus. And what Paul experienced utterly changed his life, including his perspective. He did a 360. Now I know, and I've commented this to people, when you're talking about someone turning around and having a change in their lives, we usually say he did a 380 or a 180. So when we say he did a 360, it means he did one of these, right? Paul did a 360 because in the 180 he met Jesus and it completely redirected everything about his life. He understood that it wasn't by doing the good things and keeping the law, it was by trusting Jesus that we're made right with God. But then the Lord turned him around again and sent him back out into the world to make sure that this message, direct from Jesus, whom Paul had seen and learned from directly, share that truth with everyone you can. And so he could tell the Galatians, yes, I have seen Jesus. I have been taught by him directly. What Paul had now was not just secondhand information. What he had was revelation, fresh from God. And what he found was he could give up trying to obey the Lord in order to please the Lord. Because of Jesus and Paul's trust in him, he already pleased the Lord, and now out of that pleasure in God, out of that love that the Father had for him, he could live a life of obedience. That was the source of his freedom. So when the Galatians were wondering, why should we listen to you, Paul? Why should we trust your word over these Jewish Christians who are telling us to be obedient to the law? Paul could say, I've seen Jesus. I've heard from Jesus, and what I'm giving you is what has changed my life. What authority can you trust? Yourself? I asked the kids this morning, who's boss in your house? And everyone chuckled. But the fact is, in each of our lives, someone needs to be the authority. And Paul is saying to us, trying to use yourself as the authority is a dead end. You don't know enough. You've not experienced enough. You don't have what it takes to be your own authority. But there is someone that he can guarantee will not only be the authority in your life, but will bring the kind of changes that will allow you to live the life that he has in mind. Those who, like Paul, die to self. I have been crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. Those who discover that experience can discover what Paul describes in Philippians chapter 3. I no longer count on my own righteousness through obeying the law. Rather, I become righteous through faith in Christ. For God's way of making us right with himself depends on faith. Paul is saying the very first thing that happens when you die to yourself is that you experience pardon. Past is gone. It's cleansed. It's wiped clean. Janice and I got to see the new Tarzan movie. And there's a neat Disney version of it that made it to Broadway. And all throughout much of both the movie and the play, and even the book that I took the time to go back and read again, Tarzan spent all of his young growing up trying desperately to get the approval of the leader of this ape tribe and never getting it. Finally, as an adult, had come into his own as a man, Tarzan killed the leopard that was threatening the ape tribe, and finally, begrudgingly, limitedly, the leader of the tribe was willing to acknowledge and accept Tarzan. But you knew it was only a matter of time before that acknowledgement and acceptance would be gone. Far too many of us live in our relationship with the Lord like that. I really messed up this time, and he's going to give it to me, and he's not going to want me back. He loves you, and he died for you, and the invitation is, come and let me make you new and clean. Not because you've been good enough, but because you can't be, and you trust what I did for you through Jesus. Pardon is the first thing we experience. The second thing is power. I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. Not the power to have your own way all the time, but the power to overcome those things in your life that drag you down, to deal with those things in life you can't deal with, to determine right from wrong and then do it. And there's one last thing that comes from Philippians. The pardon that cleanses us and the power to live for Jesus. And finally, this partnership. But listen to what it entails. I want to suffer with him, sharing in his death, so that one way or another I will experience the resurrection from the dead. The partnership that comes when we die to self and are connected with Jesus brings power, but it also brings suffering. And the suffering itself is the very thing that draws us closer to Jesus. Last Monday, I went to Hershey Medical Center. I got to meet Scott and Molly Kingsley, Janice's niece, who was there with cancer. They look like a very ordinary couple. But they exude such an aura of joy. Molly is lying in the hospital bed with cancer, her husband beside her, knowing that this may be the last week that he has with her. And there was still this deep sense of joy. Their lives exemplified these three things. They knew because of Jesus that they've been pardoned. They had experienced His power through their lives to cope with everything they had been through. And just as importantly, their partnership with Jesus meant that they would suffer. He doesn't exempt His children from suffering, but He gives them what they need to identify with Him in His suffering. And the suffering isn't eliminated, but now it means something. There's a reason for it. One commentator said this: death and resurrection is the rhythm of the Christian life. Dying to self, living to Jesus. Suffering on behalf of Jesus, experiencing His power. Death and resurrection are the rhythm of the Christian life. And so the real source of freedom, the one that Paul discovered, the one we've been talking about today, is not doing what I think best, doing what I have the right to do, and certainly not trying to keep all the rules, but by dying to self and letting Jesus take charge. Pray with me.